Support for CFO Thought Leader comes from Plantful and U.S. Bank. CFO Thought Leader is pleased to feature this episode of the Controllers Classified podcast, hosted by Erik Zhou, Chief Accounting Officer of Brex.
Welcome to Controllers Classified, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the dynamic world of controllers, accountants, and finance leaders, and hear how their ever-evolving roles are redefining accounting and the future of business. And now, here's your host, Erik Zhou.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Controllers Classified. I'm your host, Erik Zhou, the Chief Accounting Officer at Brex. I am honored to introduce today's guest, Matt Didden, Controller at NexHealth. This is one of our first guests in the healthcare industry and our first episode of Season 2. Given Matt's background across healthcare and fintech, and mine, I'm in fintech as well, we wanted to spend today talking about accounting in highly regulated industries. So without much further ado, welcome, Matt.
Yeah, great, Erik. Great to be here and happy to join the podcast.
Maybe just a kickstart, tell us a little bit about how you got into accounting.
Yeah, so I didn't go to college thinking I'd be an accountant. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do exactly. Originally thought I wanted to be in technology, IT, computer science. Took a few accounting classes, started to enjoy it, and then graduated right in the middle of the financial crisis, which it was very nice to have an accounting degree. The world always needs accountants. And so I thought that would be a pretty safe play. Started my career and really got a fondness for it, enjoying working in accounting, being client service, working with, other controllers, CFOs, founders, helping them understand their business and, learn how to best run things and make business decisions around their business.
And did you get started in an accounting firm at first after school, or were you like straight in industry or something else?
Yeah, I started at a small regional firm first, which I thought was a great step in my career, able to get right into the thick of things with clients. Eventually then moved over to Big Four accounting to get that type of experience working with public companies, Fortune 500 companies, pre-IPO startups, and then decided that I really wanted to be on the industry side. I really enjoyed working with my clients, seeing what they were doing on a day in and day out basis, and wanted to take my career in that direction. I think I learned a lot about the variety of things that accountants do once I actually made that move. It's not all debits and credits every day. You're really able to step in and be an advisor for the business. And it's a really great path that I feel like I've taken my career down.
What were some of the moments that led you to that understanding? And I totally get you. It is not just the numbers, it's what you make of the numbers also. But what were some of the things that happened in your career that helped you along the way to make that realization?
Yeah, I remember the first job I had after leaving public accounting, first few weeks there, being asked a lot of questions about sales operations, closing deals, reporting things in Salesforce and CRM systems. And it was certainly a crash course in an area that I didn't really know much about and a scope of the role that I didn't really expect as much. And so kind of being thrown right there in the middle of the fire to solve real world business problems, not just pure financial reporting, but true operational things. Great learning experience and being able to find out more about how truly a business is run behind the scenes.
And when you got into industry, what were the steps that you took? What were the major lessons and the first things that you would always do whenever you got into a new job?
I think for me, joining an organization is developing as many relationships as you can internally, whether it's with individuals in sales, engineering, marketing, people ops. Accounting works best when you can be as cross-functional as possible, really feeling like you're moving from a client service role at a public accounting firm to client service at the company and building connections, finding out what challenges these individuals have, what questions they're trying to answer. I think that's a key process to being able to do that, to set yourself up then to build things or create foundations that really then can support the business going forward.
Okay, so you were at these accounting firms. You obviously worked with a lot of different companies. You've also worked in fintech and now you're in healthcare. So sounds like you've had exposure to all kinds of debits and credits is what I'll say. What are the things that are similar across all of these things? Like at the end of the day, is the accounting just the same across everything?
I think what's similar across all of them is that, the purpose of accounting is to synthesize information in a way to inform leaders of the business. And taking that as a general principle, you can then apply it to then figuring out, okay, well, what are the specific things these individuals need to know? Whether you're in software, fintech, healthcare, manufacturing, et cetera. It's all about providing that information to management, to your CEO, to your head of sales, to marketing, allowing them to make the decisions that will drive the business forward. And so taking that as a core principle and kind of back to what I said about getting those relationships internally, finding out what those are. And you have to mold yourself and your team and your vision to what's going to be best for those individuals. And so, but always back to that core around, all right, how does the information reflect the state of the business? And that's really kind of what you need to anchor, what I feel like you should anchor yourself on to then be able to support those individuals.
So I have a very similar example of this. When I joined Brex is actually my first job in industry. I was at a Big Four for 11 years before joining Brex. We were doing a NetSuite implementation. I hear tell you that's also going on at your job right now. But when I first joined Brex, we were doing a NetSuite implementation and we were designing the chart of accounts. So we're picking out all the numbers, picking out all the GLs. My old CFO used to have a saying of, well, GLs are free, right? You can have as many as you want. And so, right, it's not about debits and credits. I could just have one big GL for all of our marketing expense and just label it marketing expense. But what we ended up doing was we actually talked to our marketing folks and asked them, well, how would you want to categorize each of the lines and types of marketing that you're doing? And we ended up like having a number of different GL accounts, obviously, for the different types of spend they had. Like that's an example I have. I don't know if do you have an example like that to share related to something like that?
We're going through a NetSuite implementation process as well right now, as you said, and did something similar, meeting with FP&A and department leads to find out what information they wanted to know, but also not letting them take full control over your GL structure. I had an experience at a previous position where, we had way too many departments. There was department codes left and right where, a lot of it was, okay, somebody wants to move into a manager role. Well, they need to manage a department. Well, there's only one person, give them a department. And so we were at a company that probably had about 250 people, and I think we had about 80 departments. And so, you need to support the business. You need to understand what they need, but also advise them and making sure that they're going down the right path. But yeah, getting that level of detail, because you're going to want to be able to give them something that's useful. You really want to be that business partner and get them information that will allow them to make decisions. And so, okay, what departments do you need? What GL accounts do you need? Can we tag these transactions with different codes, classifications, locations? Luckily with all modern ERP systems now, you can really customize a lot of things, which is a blessing and a curse sometimes that you need to be able to manage correctly. But really it starts with, what does the business need? And not just now either. I think a big role of a controller is to be able to see over the horizon a little bit, to understand not just what somebody needs right now, but what are they going to need in a year and maybe even 2 years? I have a philosophy that any decision we make right now from a structuring foundation standpoint needs to last for 24 months. If it's not going to last for 24 months, we either need to stick with the current state or do something different. Especially in startup world, you can't make a decision now that will last 5 years. That makes the business too rigid. You need to be able to be adapting into the changes as the business grows and evolves over time. But also, you need to make things that will last enough time so that you're not constantly rebuilding or refactoring your work. So there's a balance to be had there, and every organization is going to be different. They're not all going to be the same, and there's no cookie cutter approach to this. And so you really need to dive into the details and talk with the individuals at the company and come to a collective decision and really feel like you're being an advisor and like sort of that client service role for internal folks.
I play that role a lot. So your example about having a lot of departments really resonates with me. 250 people, 80 departments. That's like what average 3-person a department, so to speak.
Yeah.
Do you really have a department with 3 people? Honestly, I can't say we're not guilty of the same thing. Even at 1,000 people, at a certain point, we had like 60 departments at Brex. And even then, there were some departments that only had a few people. And it's not really a department then. It's more like a team, right? And they just want to split out some kind of reporting like that. And so we ended up doing this big exercise actually this past year where we consolidated a lot of teams and like actually just made branches off of like core teams that we do the tracking on. And so, yeah, that was a big change we made this past year.
Yeah, I'm sure it made your life and your team's life a whole lot easier. And it trickles down as well. FP&A now doesn't have to develop budgets for these individual departments or allocate them. You can show information that isn't so granular that it gets lost a little bit. There's win-wins around the organization for doing things like that.
So that's some of the stuff that we do kind of almost at any company. You have to make sure the data is organized. You have to have the right tracking. Talk to your stakeholders to see the reporting that would serve them best. What about when it comes to healthcare industry and diving into the potentially specific accounting requirements there? I think this is your first job in healthcare.
Yeah, first entity I've been at that's, been healthcare focused. And obviously with healthcare, the first thing that always comes up in every conversation is HIPAA around the data requirements and the sensitivity of this. And, I think we all deal with PII in some sense, whether
and with PII?
Personal identifiable information. So, All right, I'm so into the accounting world that the jargon just flows out.
I get accused at the company of being the king of acronyms. So I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
With HIPAA data, it's highly regulated, very sensitive around it, especially, our customers are sensitive around it, our vendors, everybody's always got their antenna up about HIPAA information. And where the approach I like to take, especially in accounting, is avoid at all costs if possible. Whether that's anonymizing information before we bring it into our ERP system for reporting or summarizing it and bringing it in a summary form, trying to avoid it as much as we can so that when we have these internal discussions, which I actually had one earlier today with our IT team about a tool that I'm looking to bring in. One thing I made sure to communicate early in the process is that, hey, we are not going to be bringing in any patient information into this new tool. It's only going to have very GL summary information, nothing specific. And you avoid then these concerns around, okay, well, what happened? What could potentially go wrong? And you steer yourself away from that. So that's a major thing on the healthcare side with the HIPAA data that we really start to think about a lot.
Don't you sometimes get questions though about like when you want to drill into, right? Like the reason why a performance metric went a certain way, you kind of end up needing some of that data eventually, right?
Sometimes, yeah. With us, where we process payments as well, and there's patient payments in there. And so, you drill all the way down into the core data, you can see who the individual was on a card transaction. Obviously Brex in the payment business, understands that. And, you need to just try to, I think, really frame out the question. That's one thing I think about as well when I answer, when our CFO comes to me or CEO with a question about, hey, why did performance do this month? Why did it go up? Why did it go down? Is there a mix change? So what's kind of going on there? Really understanding what is the question that we want to answer. And maybe also telling him that, all right, I'm going to need a day or two to get this to you because, of how we structured the data, that it isn't all there in a snap of the fingers because we've intentionally made this decision that we're going to segregate things. And so I think that's clear. Good to communicate expectations with management around, timing of being able to answer questions and that. Sure, you can build a system that has everything all together in one place that makes it easy to answer, but you now open yourself up to other risks around security and privacy that, those things can be overcome, but do you want to bring on that burden of having to be able to do that?
So I'm curious how you operationally make it happen. So what we do at Brex is a lot of PII, right? We're financial services. When we try to reconcile or drill into the data that we've reported from accounting and finance and dig into the individual customers that, maybe a laggard in spend or people that are overperforming, we have a key and we look back and we have to reconcile everything and make sure it all hangs together. And it does add a few days sometimes, like to get the right reporting out, to make sure that people understand. Ultimately, like there's this select number of people that have access to do that. That's how we're managing it. Like that's my first part. The second part was I actually had to also spend time educating folks that this is the process and here's why. And, they don't necessarily like it, but then this is just kind of how it is, if that makes sense.
I've had those conversations before, and it's not always the answer that somebody wants to hear. But generally, once you explain to them the why, then they kind of say, okay, I understand. And especially when you say, I can still get you an answer, it's doable. I always say that anything is possible with enough effort. So you can get there, but it's just then the process of how it's done and why it's done that way. And to me, the main benefit, or one of the major benefits of that is, when a customer has a question and you have all your stuff buttoned up and designed well. I mean, we've had this before where, we invoice our customers and they want to, wait, is any of this information going to be on our invoice or in statements or whatnot? And we can confidently and quickly tell them, oh, nope, don't worry. We've separated our systems. None of that, HIPAA privacy data is going to be in our system here. It can't end up there. We don't show it there. And it really helps your customers know that this is a big focus of yours, because it's certainly a focus of theirs, that they want to make sure that their data is protected and that it's safe. We hear about, I got a letter the other day in the mail about some service that I didn't even know I was signed up for, had a data breach and alerting me to this. And it seems like these letters are coming in more and more often now. And so for us to tell our customers that this is a major focus of ours and that we think about it in all of our decisions that involve data, it's comforting to them. And they know that they can feel safe with us, being able to provide them the services that we do.
Do you have any KPIs for your controls related to this, or measurement of performance related to this on your team?
Nothing specific, I guess.
Because it's kind of binary, right? There's either a breach or no breach, or
right.
Yeah.
Which it's kind of interesting you say that. Yeah, it is a little bit of a binary, breach or no breach. Where it probably should be, though, okay, did we actually find something? Ideally, you should never have a breach, because you can be able to find stuff before it actually happens. It's not I think a formal KPI we have, at least in our finance team here. But I have been at organizations before that do look at these things, whether it's, engineering with hot fixes or, different development areas where they try to measure these things to figure out, okay, wait, did we have to do something unexpected, and treating that as a KPI to understand, how the business is performing towards this metric.
I often feel, and Brex has been on this journey, we do have a, highly regulated entity at our broker dealer. And so the IT environment at the broker dealer supporting all the controls there is scrutinized. That's been some of the hardest kind of like work that I've had to do, at least cross-functionally. It's educating the engineers who, they didn't come from working at other financial services companies, and then sharing with them the importance of the controls. Have you had success there?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, especially specifically with engineering. I find engineers are always very curious about accounting related things. I've never had an engineer tell me that they didn't want to learn about it. They always seem interested in accounting, which has been my experience. Not sure if it's also yours, but
do you think those are the people that would have been accountants, if not for the fact that, right? Because there's this huge dearth in America of accountants.
Yeah, I know. I wish, which maybe we can start a movement there to, less engineering, more accountants to try to help them out. But yeah, usually once I've explained to them, the need for something, of kind of why it needs to be done a certain way, or, I think about the what could go wrong, especially engineers think about it in specific to the software they're building. They understand data privacy or things breaking, but they don't always think about it to others at the organization that may be tying into their data. I'm sure at Brex, we've done this before. You really try to integrate your ERP system in with the core platform. Gets you a lot of efficiencies, makes things a whole lot easier. But now you're passing data from what the engineers are building to a third-party tool. I've always had good success explaining to engineers, okay, why this matters. And even the longer-term vision, here at NexHealth, we're a private company. We don't have to do any SOX compliance or anything like that. We strive to incorporate some lightweight SOX principles into what we do as just a best practice. But, explain to an engineer of, hey, one day we maybe will be a public company, and how do we lay some foundational groundwork now to really support that, as well as just making sure that the business doesn't have an oops moment. You never want one of those. You don't want an oops. And so I've always had luck talking to engineers about that principle, and they get it. They're very rational individuals. And once you kind of bring this into their world a little bit, it just clicks for them.
Yeah. And will they prioritize it though? Like, how does it make its way on the roadmap?
Yeah. Now you're talking about a different question around priorities, which anybody who's worked at a software company or engineering folks company knows all about the struggle for prioritization, which, we've certainly had some things, and in all my roles, where stuff gets bumped down on the roadmap. And it's the beginning of every quarter is always a little bit of a, town hall debate in a way around, okay, what are we going to work on? What's going to be focused on this quarter? And everybody always has really great ideas. And then it's a matter of the business deciding, okay, what are the things that we can focus on that will drive value and drive the most amount of value for the business in the time that we have. We'd all like to build everything that we could. That's just never a possibility. And so trade-offs need to be made.
There isn't a magic bullet. And I even recently heard about a very large tech company, and I'm not going to share the name, but in order to fix this, they actually had to make org structure changes. They moved, call it business systems or IT engineering team, like not product facing, and they moved them all to report into finance.
I think about this in the sense of like data, where I've yet to meet a small company that has a centralized data team. Usually data is a team that is spread out throughout the company and put into different places. And maybe there's a data person in engineering and in RevOps, maybe finance, and they all have different managers and different directives, but they're all trying to work on this same data problem. And so, it reminds me how you said there, a reorganization. I know it's tough to do, but I always feel that a company, especially maybe once you get to 300 employees, really having a true dedicated data function that can focus on gathering data, structuring data, reporting it, creating that single source of truth for entities. Because I think more times than not, companies get up to a scale of 1,000, 2,000 employees and then try to do it. And at this point, now it's really tough to wrangle that together and pull it in a way that can still support things without breaking the business.
I want to move on to a different topic, also a cross-functional topic, but something from your previous company. So you were at Bolt. And when you were at Bolt, right, you guys had these equity options or equity awards that you gave to employees, and then you guys worked out a bunch of loans to your employees. And this was in the news, so this is why I'm asking. But can you give us a look under the hood in terms of the decision-making and the accounting ramifications for all that? And I'm guessing you had to work with legal on it.
Yeah. There was a lot of people involved: finance, legal, people ops, and
maybe give the audience also. I'd love to hear just from your point of view. What were you trying? What was the objective, right? And then what were you trying to achieve?
Yeah, the objective was to try to, give employees, a pathway to make a decision around their equity that normally would have been afforded only to select individuals at an organization, and open that up to more individuals. Especially equity is complex, and you have legal issues, tax issues, financial planning. And the goal of this was to give employees a pathway that may not have been afforded to them at other companies.
Basically giving them liquidity for illiquid compensation that they've been receiving.
Not liquidity directly, but more of a sort of tax planning, investing structure for them, where, they're allowing them to effectively start the clock on capital gains tax, which, I've seen this a number of times in my career with executives. It's a pretty common program at, I would say mid-stage startups that they do. And the idea was to be able to provide this to more individuals, and like you said, it's complex, involving, finance and accounting. What is the reporting ramification of this? How do these work from a, GAAP reporting? And then legal, how do you structure this from a legal standpoint and tax standpoint? And as well as people ops, just communicating this to people. Okay, how is this going to work? Like, what does this mean? Definitely was, something that generally is only, like I said, done for executives. And so the idea was, okay, how do we democratize this a little bit more and allow others to participate in something that, they might not be able to do at another organization.
So what I heard was you guys had employees, all these employees had stock option awards. Those stock options, in order for you to have ownership of the shares, you actually have to buy them. Right? There's a strike price. I don't know how much it was, but there's some amount of money you have to pay upfront just to have true ownership. And also, oftentimes, that check is a high dollar figure if you actually want to do a meaningful number of shares. And people just don't have that cash lying around, right? And so the program that you're talking about is, how do we give folks access to the funds to buy these shares now, so that you're not waiting until you get acquired, you go IPO, and then you definitely have to pay basically like wages income, like your marginal tax rate. You can buy it now, and so that when you sell it later, you get the long-term cap gains rate.
Yep, effectively, yeah, that's the idea. And it's something where, especially from the tax perspective, options and equity grants in general are extremely complicated. I think very few individuals who are granted these, and it's a significant portion of their compensation, don't always fully understand how it all works. Even myself being in accounting, don't always fully understand how these things work. And there's a lot of nuances and different rules that, can change sometimes. If Congress decides to change the taxability of equity instruments or different, other triggers in the tax code, it can really make this complicated, which, is something when we always talk to employees about their options. The first thing I tell them is talk to your tax advisor, because you need to understand, how does this impact your specific situation? Because there is no standard playbook for how to do these things.
What was the accounting for it? Like, did you guys hold the loans, so to speak, or was there something? Was there another party involved, or how did you guys work it out?
Yeah, no. So the note was with the company, and so they were just accounted for kind of as a loan on the books of the company.
Okay, makes sense. Maybe now, okay, talking about this topic, obviously the executives were involved in a situation like this. There's a lot of complexities in your roles across the different startups that you've been. What's been your strategy in communicating effectively with the executives?
Yeah, so whenever I talk with an executive, I think about two things. What is the question they're trying to answer? And when they get that answer, what are they going to do with it? I think those two things in parallel are really important. A lot of times, people generate metrics and KPIs just to have a KPI, to throw it on a PowerPoint spreadsheet and up at a meeting, and that nobody really knows what to do with it. So for me, I really want to drive back all the way to, what is the decision process and what's decisions going to be made there, and getting alignment with the executives on that question and really understanding then their needs. Sometimes you find that they ask a question and they think that they want that answer and that they're going to go do something with it, but they really want something else. And so, back before chatting about kind of ERP stuff, these are the type of questions to ask as part of that process, where you're really finding out what is the core piece there that they want, and building around that and challenging it and kind of poking at it and understanding really what is it that we're trying to get to. So for me, talking to executives that way, especially executives that maybe are not or don't have a strong financial background, where they aren't finance people. These might just be, engineers that are now in an executive role, or salespeople in an executive role, not core finance individuals. So, you can't go and throw P&Ls and balance sheets at them, or just some complicated AR metric, for example. You really want to understand, what is it that they want to try to accomplish? They're trying to run a business, not necessarily run a P&L. And so understanding kind of where they want to be there, and then kind of adjusting your process and making sure that you're supporting that. Sometimes you may get an answer, and then you just work behind the scenes to then make it kind of in the accounting sense and the finance sense to what they're then looking for.
So at Brex, you're totally right. Like I speak with other folks or folks on the exec team, and they're managing their function, right? They may even be in charge of the revenue for a certain subset of customers. So they own this portfolio. And then their key metric is just that revenue number. So they don't fully appreciate, or they're not gold on the entire P&L, certainly not net contribution margin or unit economics to a certain extent. And then I think part of my job has been educating people, actually. Like I went to business school, I got an accounting degree. I've been looking at P&Ls my whole career. At the end of the day, I try to take all that knowledge and I break it down for them that, hey, I know this is your goal, but if we took a look at the long-term picture of our business, we have to make sure we earn revenue that has better unit economics. And I explain like, okay, if you enable this kind of customer, right, these are the unit economics given these terms. But if you think about selling it this way, like this is what the P&L would look like instead. And then if you just compare the bottom lines, right, like the math just proves itself out. Do you have, is it like topics like that? What's a topic that you've gone over recently in that sense?
Yeah, something you said there that really kind of struck with me too was just around, sometimes, how goals are structured, versus, okay, what is better for the long-term health of the business? Yeah, I, at a previous job, we had a situation where, we were trying to bring a new product to market and deciding how it would be like structured and reported on, and really trying to think about, okay, well, what is the longer term picture on this? How do we structure this in a way that, achieves the goals that we're wanting to? Like before we even start, before you've even kind of gone to market or set a goal with it, being able to set that appropriately, I think is a really key.
What about when you share something and it's like from your perspective, like you're trying to just share like the bigger picture and then you get pushback?
The situation I'm thinking of is we were determining the best way to report, a cost structure associated with revenue. Obviously, margin is such a major factor, especially, in software.
And this is gross profit, right? This is unit economics.
Right. Yeah. With gross profit, we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we, classify something and figure out what it is? Which bucket does it go into? I think, hopefully, as most people know, I think the guidance on what things go into cost of revenue is about one line in the entire GAAP codification. There ain't a whole lot of guidance in there. And the SEC also doesn't provide a whole lot of guidance. And so, it's clear as mud, as they would say. And so, a lot of it is figuring out, okay, what's the substance of the transaction? And that's for me when I've talked with executives around, well, how does this need to work from an accounting purpose? I really just try to first, let's go back to the substance of the transaction. When you think of that balance of substance over form, I'm always in the camp of substance where, okay, what is it that this actually is? What is it that it's meant to be? And, what is the economic reality associated with it? And, if we end up with a decision that maybe isn't the preferred outcome, then you can go to the business and say, okay, well, what are the options we can do to try to restructure this, to change it around? Sometimes you can make an economic change on something with a vendor, customer, third party that then can get you the outcome you want to. Especially sometimes something may have been originally structured in a certain way to serve a certain purpose, and maybe that might not be true today. And you can work with that third party to restructure things and really align now the substance of it to what you're looking for.
Gone through these exercises in identifying what should be in cost of revenue, so unit economics, and also conversations about gross versus net. Whether or not some revenue number and some cost of revenue number should be presented gross, like separated out, or if I should just have a net revenue number where they're combined together. And there's a range here. I found that there are some substantive transactions, so to speak, that if you're just being intellectually honest, this is what it costs to reduce the revenue, right? Like, at Brex, we process all kinds of credit card transactions, right? They're all through MasterCard though. We would not be able to process any of those transactions without MasterCard fees. And so that is purely a cost of revenue, right? That's part of my unit economics versus my interchange revenue on the transaction. But then there are these things where like server costs, do you really need those server costs for our platform in order for that swipe to occur? And then for us to get the data to know how much we need to settle up, on the following day for that transaction when we front the money on the card.
And I've had this a few times, with different business leaders where what you just said there of, okay, well, do we actually need this? Where I think some people like to look at something that's cost of revenue and say, well, we can run the product without this. And so maybe it's not cost of revenue. And, like your example of servers, excess server capacity. Well, it's excess. We're not using it. Where I like to go back to the business though and say, well, if you're not using it, then we should stop spending the money on it. One of these where somebody will say, this isn't necessary to actually run the product. Okay, well then why are we paying for it? And this is where now you can really take that controller role, away from the debits and credits and into that business advisory, where maybe there's something where somebody didn't actually think it was possible to turn this thing off. And that, you use this accounting treatment to really then drive a business change and get more efficiency. I've had that a number of times with different scenarios, different companies, different industries. I think this is something that's pretty common across a lot where there may be just idle costs sitting in cost of revenue. And it's like, okay, well, let's improve our efficiency here. Let's not just move it from one bucket to another, but actually try to now drive better financial performance of the business.
So I'm going to go one step further on the example I just shared with the server costs, because the conclusion was actually that we did include it in unit economics. And the reason for it, because what's the alternative? The alternative is that instead of using software to ingest the MasterCard file, sure, I can get a huge text file or a CSV for MasterCard and try to organize all the payments that way, parse it out, and then make the payment the following day for settlement. And that's just not scalable.
Yeah, right? No, that does not sound fun.
Yeah. So no, we do have the server costs in there because without those server costs, we wouldn't be able to process the transactions at the volume that we actually do. And actually, it is kind of like we thought about it more. It is part of the unit economics versus our interchange. Now, you might argue, in the spectrum of aggressive versus conservative, you can make a judgment where we stand on that. We kind of thought that's the intellectually honest way for ourselves to look at our business. But that's, to me, that's what it boils down to, right? Are you being intellectually honest? Is there a logic behind what you're doing?
Right. I think that's a great way to phrase that. And, I even think where, once you share these numbers with a third party, whether it's investors, potential investors, other stakeholders, regulators, they're generally going to see through things once they dive into the details. And so, if you have a thought through, honest analysis about how you want to treat these, especially, gross versus net's a great example where there's a lot of judgment. And I've seen even 10Ks from two different companies that seem to have similar kind of businesses, economics, that have treated things differently. And so not always clear what actually the outcome should be. But if you're honest with yourself and you feel like that the numbers reflect the reality of the transaction and the economics, then you can stand by it. But you need to be able to put in some of that work and really review and understand and look at others, what they're doing out there. A lot of stuff comes back to what's standard industry practice. Especially in the payment space, like you said, there's some pretty good examples out there of what others are doing around interchange and, cost of revenue on the payment side to understand, okay, well, what is it that others are doing here? And if you deviate away from that, likely someone who sees your numbers is just going to make an adjustment on it anyways, when evaluating your business.
Yeah, I agree with that. That thing you mentioned about what are others doing and comparing yourself with industry and the market, that's actually also part of my strategy when communicating some of these topics to executives. Because, we're a private company, but we do have some comparable peers out in the market. And I kind of just share, well, this is what it's looking like right now with the presentation for these public companies. And oh, by the way, I know that investors, when they're looking at those companies, and this is going back to the gross versus net topic, it's almost not as important today as it used to be, because now people are doing gross profit multiples and not top line revenue or gross revenue multiples, right? When it comes to valuation. And so, it's those kinds of details also that I share with executives that then make the conversation a little bit more relevant to them. And then I take that information back and working with our auditors, it just paints a different picture and getting to the answer that I need to kind of work with all the stakeholders and their views, if that makes any sense, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's key there, working with all the stakeholders. There's a lot of individuals involved, and making sure to get alignment across everybody. Because if you don't have that, your life's going to be difficult. There's going to be a lot of challenges, and just you're going to have to, make subsequent changes that aren't easy to do. And so really getting that alignment across all of them to start with is so key. And I like what you said as well about aligning with your comparables. It's something we actually have here at NexHealth now, a product that we look to be launching next year. There's a public comparable out there who has something relatively similar that we look at, and their accounting methodology is a little bit different than what we're planning. And so we're already trying to lay the groundwork now to set that up, to say, okay, well, this is what we're going to be comparing ourselves to and the type of metrics, and making sure that we don't end up in a situation down the road showing performance to our board, comparing to this comparable that's completely different. And now we're showing apples and oranges that doesn't provide useful information, and really making sure that we get ahead of this now before we're even in market with the product.
Yeah, when I go through our audits every year, I actually have a meeting with our auditor typically before the start of Q3, just to put it all on the table. Hey, these are the technical accounting topics that I think you'll want to spend some time on. Because I'm just being intellectually honest too. Like they'll figure it out at the end of the day anyway. So I might as well just do the hard stuff first and try to get it out of the way before the end of the year.
We're having the same conversation with our auditor about, this new product, and we don't have a lot of details yet to share with them. A lot of it's still being sorted out, but we've given them the very high level, hey, this is what we're thinking. This is what initially kind of our preliminary thoughts are, just to get the idea in their head. There's nothing worse than surprising your auditor with a new line of business or a very complicated transaction the first day they're out there with field work. Your auditor will be much more friendly to you with that early and often communication. And
I don't like surprises for my auditor, so I try to do the same for them, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think surprise is a word that it should never be in the same sentence as auditor. That's a very good outcome.
We are at our final segment of the show. This is a segment we call Finance Leaders Are Fun Too. And so here we ask our guests, share a funny accounting story, share an unusual expense report that will bring us some joy as we think about our profession.
Back in my time in public accounting, there was somebody I knew who told the first year on their team, they were at the client sites, just a few blocks away from the office here in San Francisco. And so asked them to go back to the office and get some supplies, notepads, pens, papers. They also asked if they can get them a box of tick marks. And so the new hire went back to the office, got the supplies they needed, and was looking around in the storage room for a box of tick marks. And went to somebody and said, do you know where I can find some tick marks? And that person also had a pretty good sense of humor and told them, you got to go down to the 6th floor. That's where the tick marks are. I'm pretty sure that individual spent about 2 hours in the office with the tick marks until they finally found somebody who told them to go back to the audit site, and the team was made a little bit of a joke on them. So, a joke you can play on maybe some of your new hires now.
That's hilarious. Oh man, good old fashioned, hazing in audit world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you very much for joining us on our show today. I thought everything we discussed and you shared was super insightful. Best of luck in your implementation of NetSuite and NexHealth.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Great to be on here and great talking with you about these topics.
Thanks for tuning in to Controllers Classified, presented by Brex. Brex is an AI-powered spend platform with global corporate cards, expense management, reimbursements, and travel. Visit Brex.com and follow Brex on social to see how they can take your accounting game and your company to new heights.
Hello, everyone. Jack here. Hope you've been enjoying our recent episodes of CFO Thought Leader. Please know that I don't take for granted this opportunity to serve you. Your time is valuable, and of course, so is the time of our CFO guests. I'll admit to you on certain weeks, I will pinch myself and say, hey, I get to do this for a living. I speak to all these impressive leaders. Undoubtedly, there are more aggressive interviewers out there, some who leave no stone unturned. But our swim lane is for finance leaders only. And those finance leaders have a unique style of leadership, one that is rooted in the burden of trust. In light of this, finance leaders must take great care not to forfeit this trust as they step into the role of being a more expressive leader. And that is what CFO Thought Leader is really about. That's why I try to remind myself week in, week out, how fortunate I am. Still, I need your help. Tell us what we're doing right. Tell us what we're doing wrong. Email me your comments at jack@cfothoughtleader.com. And please visit cfothoughtleader.com. You'll find a listener survey right on the nav bar. As always, thank you for listening.